Hello and welcome to WoodPods, the podcast designed to share sporting experience and knowledge to instill passion within the NLCS Dubai community on behalf of Team NLCS.
Last week, we interviewed the performance director to the GB Judo team, and this week we continue with the theme of professionals in sport as we welcome Jack Grundy to the show, a performance lifestyle coach who, at the age of just 30, has worked with the GB sailing, fencing and skeleton Olympic and Paralympic teams. Jack talks us through his positive connection with sport as a child, culminating in competing for the GB Triathlon team alongside the famous Brownlee brothers. Jack also shares his struggle with dyslexia and how this positive connection with sport helped him through his education and into his dream career of assisting elite performers in their everyday lives. Welcome and thank you for reaching out to the NLCS community.
No worries. Thank you very much for having me, Nicky. It's great to be on.
Let's start by just painting a little picture about you, Jack, because you're in an amazing position, an amazing role. How old are you?
I'm 30 years old. Some people say I look a bit younger, which is always good. And I am currently on the Isle of Wight.
What was your education like?
I had a bit of a mixed background. I struggled in education purely down to my dyslexia. And I was diagnosed with dyslexia just a little bit later. I suppose sport helped me stay engaged with education, which was a bit of a lifeline. My background was I actually did a BTEC at FE. With my triathlon achievements got me a place into the University of Bath on their foundation degree, and that was a course set up for performance athletes, but to give them an entry into HE, and it was a sport performance BA undergrad. After that, I went on to train as a teacher at the University of Southampton, which was good because I could move back towards the Isle of Wight and work within a college, and I went on to do a bit of teaching as my first kind of role.
Okay, you mentioned triathlon there. Was that something that was a large part of your life for a while?
Oh yeah, a massive part of my life. From an early age, I was swimming, twice a day, 5 to 6 times a week, and then I suppose that fitness carried me into lots of other areas of sports. So cross country, I would always typically do quite well regionally, purely because I had that cardiovascular base, and I loved just going outdoors with my dad, mountain biking, and in the end, at the age of 16, you start to put it all together, and you start to realise that you could be okay at triathlon. So that certainly then created a little bit of a path into endurance sport. And like I said, helped me gain places within certain universities, which I'm really thankful of, because I probably wouldn't have carried on if I didn't have that passion to train at a university.
And what level did you compete at?
Elite World Championship. So I was competing for Great Britain, and I think my best position was 9th at World Champs. I was certainly in the era of where Great Britain was. We were unbelievable in triathlon. We had the Brownlee brothers, we had Will Clark before that, and Stuart Hayes, and all the guys, all the legends that I suppose paved the way for triathlon were there. So I was thankful to be involved, but at the same time didn't quite get enough funding to carry on.
I guess to get going against the Brownlee brothers is a little bit difficult.
Yeah, definitely. But honestly, they changed the sport, so it was great to be racing when those guys were around.
Okay, so you've just touched on the different sports that you enjoyed during childhood. Your relationship with sport as you grew up sounds very positive. Can you expand on any of that?
I suppose sport gave me that confidence in that school environment, where I would typically be in lower sets for every other subject. And I think it just showed that, specifically with endurance sports, if you put the time and hard work and effort in, you can pretty much achieve anything. And it gave me some of those, I suppose, key skills or mindsets to progress within education in the future. Like it's not always easy, but actually if you do 20 hours in the pool, you're going to get better, or you're going to, you put your time in on your schoolwork, you will achieve what you need to. And it's not the be all and end all, but it's normally just, it gets you that next step into what you want to do in the future. It was a real positive experience for me being involved with sport at that age. It helps give me massive confidence.
When did you realise that you wanted to actually work in sport?
That's a really good question. I mean, I was always passionate and interested in sport, well, in terms of sports science, because I wanted to understand how I could be better on a daily basis. But I never actually realised that I wanted to work in sport until I properly exited, and I say exited or transitioned, the word associated to you leaving that identity. So it never really clicked that I wanted to work in sport until I'd left that. So I left triathlon, purely because I probably couldn't view the roles within sport properly until I wasn't an athlete myself. So probably at the age of just after 20, I was working as a teacher, and I could see all these students that were incredibly good at sport but were struggling to I suppose balance the two. And that's where my passion came for wanting to work in sport, and specifically within performance lifestyle.
Between finishing school and working with Olympic teams, how did the journey play out for you?
So I obviously went to university. I managed to get a 2-1. And at that point, I was also just starting to progress quite nicely within my triathlon career. So I decided to go, I suppose, full-time, you'd say, as a triathlete. I was getting paid by a French team to go and race out there. And it works like a football academy or a football team. They would pay for you to come out and race for them, and you would get certain bonuses for certain positions within the race as well, which is good. So I started to get a bit of understanding around actually when sport becomes a job rather than for fun, and how you deal with the sponsors in those situations. But I then actually took a part-time role within a school as a learning support assistant. And for me, that was probably one of the most rewarding roles I've ever done. I could see myself all those years back struggling in some of the lessons and getting some support. And actually, I got so much enjoyment from doing that. But it gave me understanding around how you support others, and I suppose how you differentiate learning and support within the classroom, but also just generally in life. I then decided I wanted to move on to be a teacher. Just wanted a bit more responsibility, and I wanted to lead, and so I went to train to be a teacher. Like I said, at Southampton. I quickly realised once I'd realised that I wasn't going to be a triathlete as well, that I wanted to work in sport. And that's then when I started speaking to my old lecturer, who had sparked a bit of a passion for, I suppose, athlete identity and athlete support generally within we call the dual career area, where athletes are in education and sport. Started speaking to him, and he said, look, there's these various courses or these roles coming up, you should apply. And I remember my first interview, it was probably about 21, 22, for the English Institute of Sport. And I applied for a role at University of Bath, and they said, look, you've got incredible passion, but you need a bit more skills and a bit more experience in you. And they recommended a course called Skills for Performance. And it was actually a week when I did it, but it's now a couple of days, where they give you the opportunity to understand how these practitioners or how these roles would work with performance sports, so your Olympic sports. And that then just sparked that passion to get a role. So I was then lucky enough to get a role with the University of Bath as the athlete support officer. And this was a real varied role. I was dealing with 150 athletes at the University of Bath, and we had scholarships. We would have different levels of sports science support, and also working with TAS, which is the Talented Athlete Scholarship Scheme attached to Sport England. I was working with a variety of stakeholders. I was doing a little bit of lecturing as well, which was crazy to think that I scraped through university, and then I was doing a bit of lecturing on athlete support. And then after that, I realised that I wanted to be a bit more specific with my support, because I was supporting so many different athletes and 150 in loads of different sports. It sometimes felt like I didn't have the right impact. So I looked for a role within a professional team setting, and the Artemis sailing team were looking for it was a training and development manager. So looked at what support you might bring in for those athletes at what time of the year, and also supported some of the logistics on the road. How do we get the best out of our sailors? So that was a really, really big eye opener for me, more around the demands of professional athletes that have to travel all the time, especially sailors where they were living out of bags and they were having to, in some cases, sail the boat to the next location. There's no such thing as holidays. So it gave me a big understanding around the demands placed upon athletes, and it is your life. I contacted Sport England and said, look, the role's been made redundant, or the team had been made redundant. Have you got anything going? And TAS knew me from working at the University of Bath and were so good. They said, look, we've got a role coming up nationwide. Would you like to work for us in supporting performance lifestyle? I said, yes, great. Exactly what I'm looking to do, and it was a step up again. So I was really grateful for that opportunity. And my role was working with performance lifestyle advisors that worked in the universities. So I would provide training and education to those guys, almost create CPD groups, and then we'd also look at how we could further develop the service for the athletes. And then I suppose that situation where, back many years ago, where I hadn't got that EIS interview, I've seen some roles come up with English Institute of Sport. They work with the Olympic teams. So TAS worked with your talent level. It was again another step up to work in that performance environment, and I couldn't really say no. It was to work with a sport that was close to the Isle of Wight, which is where my family were based, and I took the role to work with British sailing and skeleton and wheelchair fencing. So I provided performance lifestyle for all those sports. And now I've moved on to a performance manager role within British sailing. So a long journey, but definitely learnt loads from each section.
So within your Olympic role as a lifestyle coach, who do you report to, and who is the role funded by?
You would report to the sport initially, but the role is very different to all other sports science practitioners. The role is paid for by UK Sports, and that money is protected purely because they recognise the importance of duty of care with the athletes. That way, then you can really protect the role and the time given to the athletes, rather than just saying, look, you've got to provide that service with that lot of money. It just ensures that the service is kept to the right level.
So how does the actual funding programme work?
The athletes are funded by an outcome matrix. So you have an A to E scale. Your A level athletes are top 10 in the world, or your Olympic squad, and then your E level athletes are your podium potential athletes that might have just won a youth medal, for example, and shown potential to progress in with senior. That each year there is opportunities for the athlete to re-qualify or jump up that funding ladder. And I suppose it's great that there's so many opportunities for athletes to progress, but it's also a bit of a con because effectively you could drop down funding at any point as well, or not any point, but at those major outcome regattas. So it's very different to your normal job. You are constantly being reviewed, and your pay can change. So it shows the demands placed upon the athletes. And in terms of the performance lifestyle role, you would normally start on a basic wage, and as you build in experience and qualifications, then you can definitely progress on that pay scale. The main qualification that performance sport is using is the ILM, which is the Institute for Leadership and Management, and they use executive coaching methods with the athletes. And level 7 is seen to be, executive level, where you're really using some pretty high level questioning to get some problem solving going with that individual.
Thank you. That's a great insight. Within your role as a lifestyle coach, how many athletes do you look after, and how often do you get to see them?
So quite a few athletes. Within sailing, I would be looking after 50 athletes roughly that sat in my section of the pathway, and then we had 20 odd in skeleton, and then 3 in wheelchair fencing. And each sport, you have a different amount of allotted time depending on how many athletes you've got. With sailing, I was contracted to work 3 days for them. So, it's quite a lot of athletes for 3 days, which means you have to be really careful around how you prioritise your time and understand, I suppose, what is a higher need than others, but also come up with some really good strategies around how you might educate or be proactive in that space. And that might be through group workshops, it could be online, it could be in person that you go to the camps, and it could be a key topic that you've seen as being a challenge for those athletes, and you might present some information or get someone in to come and present that. Or you might create infographics around some of those key things that you would recommend or how you can support them. Give you an example, it could be an infographic on how you manage your money and time when you move away from home and you go full-time training, or it could be on how you have a critical conversation with a coach. How do you feed back to them around what you want to see in the future with your training? Because it's important that it's a two-way process within coaching. So there's loads of things you can do, but the key thing is to remember you can't always provide one-to-one support and have to prioritise it.
Now, you worked with 3, not 2, but 3 Olympic and Paralympic teams. Amazing. Yeah. Skeleton, sailing, fencing. How did the roles differ?
I suppose I learned this, I was told this through that Skills for Performance Day that English Institute of Sport provided. And the key learning I took away from that is that every sport has its own culture, its own needs, challenges, and they were worlds apart, if that helps. But the principles were the same in how you would support them. So if I give you a few examples, sailing is very spread out. There's a lot of athletes. The sailing calendar is very different. You have regattas through the winter as well, which would cause a little bit of trouble with their education. Skeleton, they'll be living out of a bag. They'll be sharing rooms. They'll be driving vans around Europe. They have limited time on the ice, so how do they maximise that? So that very different culture. And also you were getting athletes coming from different sports into skeleton because it was a talent transfer, so that they might have their ideas around what is good training in athletics, or they might have their idea around what is good training from gymnastics, and that then has to be aligned when you get to skeleton, which was interesting. And then fencing, 2 fencers, and they were the funniest, nicest guys that I could work with. And the main thing was just ensuring that those guys were just happy on the road together, because it was such a small team. So understanding the dynamics between each other and what they need to perform their best. So some real different scenarios in each sport. Yeah.
And from those 2 fencers was one Dimitri Kucha?
Yes, he was.
Yes.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Great guy.
Yeah, we'll give him a shout out. Why not? And of course, Dimitri was on the show a few weeks ago. Okay, so the roles differed quite massively. But what are the transferable skills that you carried across into each role? Because clearly there are those transferable skills that you need to be successful. And I'm sure that the students at NLCS would love to know what they need to be developing and building to become successful like yourself.
Best skill that they can have is their communication skills. I always joke, but I say you're almost like a social chameleon. You have to almost read the scenario and understand how that person likes to be communicated to, and adapt pretty quickly. So I'll give you an example. If I was reporting to a performance director, I would understand that they would like to know, potentially they might want to know how that's going to impact the performance. Yeah, and I would have to be able to be really clear in how I get that across. When you're working with certain sailors or certain athletes, you would have to think, well, how does this athlete like to be communicated with? What's important to them? And I suppose adjust your communication style to put them at ease or build that rapport. And then I talked about this before, didn't I, with the ILM, with the coaching style questions, being able to land some really good coaching questions to the athletes that get them to think and reflect and understand, I suppose, what the problem is and what's best for them is really important. And being unbiased in the situation as well. That's one of the strongest parts of this role, is that you are there for the athletes' development and well-being. You know, it doesn't matter if they've won a medal or not. Actually, we need to just keep them progressing and happy.
Okay, so how would you specifically say that you help athletes fulfill their Olympic dream?
A saying that we always put is to remove the unnecessary noise. So if we've got athletes worrying about finances, if we've got athletes worrying about team relationships or travel plans, all that kind of stuff, if you can help support that athlete and reduce that noise and allow them to focus on the performance, that's a it's a definite help. Supporting their personal development, so promoting that they do education or training alongside their sport, because we know one thing for certain is that they will leave sport at some point. That's one thing we can guarantee, and I normally say that when they join the team, and that's one thing I can definitely guarantee, is that you will leave this sport. But we want them to leave in the right way, where they're excited about their next steps. And it might not be in sport, it might be that they stay in sport, but we want them to be prepared and think about what is that next step. Another area is supporting them with transitions. So if they're training in a different location, work with a different coach, it might be that you support that next step. So you might organise for them to go and see the training venue, meet the coach. You might help them with that accommodation. So anything that's going to help that next step. And then try and, I suppose, align the sport and education and ensure that they can do both of them at the same time and they reach their potential in both. That's the idea. And I realise sometimes that's not possible, but it's a really important part, that they can still engage in education. And then I suppose the last bit is well-being, which is massive. Well-being and mental health is pretty big within sport, purely because the environment is hard. It's important that we get the athletes to think about how do they, I suppose, re-energise themselves, how are they having breaks from training, that they can come back to training in the best place.
What other professionals, apart from the lifestyle coach, do the athletes have supporting them in their quest?
This is just constantly getting bigger and bigger, this list at the moment, as we look for more marginal gains. I suppose you'd say, using the cycling term, within skeleton, within sailing, there is a massive emphasis around equipment and technical. So there is engineers, there is experts within aerospace that would get involved with some of the projects with these sports. Then physios, strength conditioning coaches, physiologists, so making sure that they're the fit as possible they can be. We've got psychologists as well, which work really closely with performance lifestyle. Their focus is normally around how do they improve the performance on the pitch or on the water, and then the PL would work with their collaboration around how you might support them off the pitch. So anything that's not related directly to in the moment would normally sit with performance lifestyle. Then you've got physiologists, got biomechanists, so looking at how the body moves through different movement patterns, or it might be how that person sat on the bike, making sure they get the most power out of it. And then any form of scientist. So we have team doctors. We will have various different people, sometimes looking at blood, and you might look at diets, all that kind of stuff. So anything that can make that person perform better, or get more out of their equipment, definitely sits in that list.
How fascinating. You are now a pathway manager for the GB sailing team. Can you just talk us through what this involves?
Yeah, I mean, this is a big change for me. Program design. So how is that year set out is definitely in there. What support the athletes get, at different parts of the pathway, and then the budget that sits behind that as well. How are we paying for it? And that normally involves various different stakeholders. So you'll be working with Sport England or UK Sport. We've also got a team of coaches, so it'll be supporting them. We do have a coach development team, but you will definitely have to support them on how they deliver to the program. And then I suppose a big aspect for my part of the program, which is that youth through to podium potential, is that talent development. So how are we retaining and developing the best athletes? And at that section as well, our athletes are in education. So I'm also leading a dual career strategy where we're trying to make sure that our sport is an education friendly sport.
Where do you see yourself in 10 years' time?
I hope doing a similar job, but ensuring that I'm still passionate. I think what I've learned is that you just need to be passionate to go the extra mile within sport, and you have to constantly be learning and being challenged. As soon as you don't have that, I feel like you can sometimes become a bit too relaxed in jobs. I want to stay in the same area, but who knows if it's the same sport or the same role specifically. I'm sure in 10 years' time that the pathway will completely change again, and there will be different emphasis on different bits.
You've got an amazing competition background and a fantastic positive relationship with sport since a child. But how good does it feel to actually now have a career in sport?
Oh, it's crazy. I mean, I sometimes have to pinch myself because working in performance sport, that talent level is exactly where I've wanted to work for years and years, and I never thought that I would secure one of those positions. But it just becomes more realistic each time when you just chip away and you take the next step and the next step, and you're like, well, actually, I could now apply for that role. And I think that's the key, is just, I suppose, not underestimating yourself, but just and just chipping away of like, oh, if I get that experience or I get that exposure, that makes it a bit more realistic in the future. And just focusing on the here and now, like how fun is it? I'm challenged. This is great. I'm getting to make some pretty cool decisions here.
Well, that rhymes really well, because we have an expression at NLCS. Part of our sort of motto and part of our culture is to not set any ceilings, but only to set floors. So that relates really, really well. So Jack, how can we follow some of the athletes that you're working with?
Really good question. I think the best way to follow British Sailing Team is going to their website. So if you just type into Google British Sailing Team, or they have a live Instagram account as well, where they're putting results and education and ideas up on there as well. And then for the fencers, the best is their Twitter. But I would follow the athletes individually. So obviously, Dimitri and Piers Gulliver, who's his fellow training partner and teammate. And
double trouble.
Double trouble they are, yeah. Nightmare, those two. Trying to get a serious conversation out of them is good fun. And then British Skeleton, I would say their Facebook account. So if you type into Facebook British Skeleton, and that gives you all their dates. Obviously pretty quiet at the moment because they're not out on the winter circuit, or no one is. But stay tuned, definitely.
Thank you. And is there any parting advice that you'd like to give our students?
I think performance lifestyle is a new area, and it sometimes doesn't have the history and backing, like physiologists do. But it is incredibly important to athletes, and it's growing in its importance with the constant pressure. So there will be more positions coming up in the future, and the best place to find out about how to become a performance lifestyle advisor is to go to the English Institute of Sport website. They also have a 10 top tips of how to become a performance lifestyle advisor. I'd say that would be the first place to start.
Brilliant, Jack. So they need to go to www.
So it's eis2win.co.uk.
Brilliant. Well, best of luck with everything, and we look forward to seeing all of your teams in action next summer. Well, Jack, thank you for connecting with NLCS community today and for educating us on lifestyle coaching in an Olympic sport, or sports, should I say. We have a very positive sporting community at NLCS Dubai, and a few keen sailors. So I'm sure they've learned a lot from your contribution today and can hopefully follow in your footsteps.
Perfect.
Thanks,
Thank
Jack.
you.
Take care.
See you. Bye-bye.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Next week on the show, we have a surprise guest. So tune in next week, episode 8 of WoodPods, to find out who the surprise guest is. Thanks for listening.